Thank you, and good morning again to everybody. Happy Father's Day for about the fifth time today. Those of you who are guests and visitors today, this is a little bit of a tradition. This is what the Hawaiian shirts are about. I don't know who started this years ago, but on Father's Day we asked the men to wear Hawaiian shirts for some reason that someone probably knows, and it seems like a good tradition to keep going. So that's what those are about this day. But as I said, we've said Happy Father's Day many times, and, for me, really, you can't say it enough. Not because it's a day to honor fathers or worship them or anything. This is not a day that the greeting card industry has created, even though they've taken advantage of it. This is not a day specifically that our culture has invented, though they take advantage of it. Fatherhood and being a father is something that God created and something that God determined for us. And for that reason, it has great value and great worth, which I'm going to talk about today. What really prompted me to think about this was there was an article or an editorial, I can't remember, a little while back, I believe in the New York Times, where they asked four so-called experts whether fathers are really necessary anymore. And what these experts concluded, three of them said, no, we don't need fathers anymore. And one of them said, maybe. We could take them or leave them. It's a very sad commentary to me that in our culture today, people do not value the importance of a father. And this weak endorsement of fatherhood that we see, for me, really is just a sad development in our world, in our culture, because, as I said, we know that God places great value and great worth on fatherhood, so much so that He chose for us to refer to Him as our Heavenly Father. And our Lord Jesus Christ, in His relationship with His Father, was a very rich and deep relationship, serving as an example for all of us. It was God who established the role of father, not our culture. And just because our culture thinks it's not very important doesn't mean that that's true. It is important. And for all you fathers here today, I want you to know you play a very important and critical role in the development of our world and society. Now, as I often say on Mother's Day, when we talk about mothers, fathers, you can't go to sleep because this is about mothers. And I'll say the same thing to you women and mothers today. Just because this is about fathers, you need to pay attention too, because some of the things I'm going to talk about certainly pertain to you in your role as well. So fatherhood, I believe, is important, despite what our culture thinks. Now, having said that, I do believe that in many cases, we fathers have played into this cultural ethos, whether from busyness at work, a lack of time, a lack of willpower, perhaps even laziness. We often have abdicated this God-given role and responsibility to others, very often to our wives, but also to the schools, to churches, other institutions where we have said to them, you take care of the raising of these children. And I can tell you, fathers here today, both from personal experience, from my education, from my training, everything in my life and my heart and my soul, that there is no thing that your child wants more from life than a daddy who cares for them, loves them, and will protect them. They want it because they need it. And without it, in many cases, they will spend their lives searching for it in inappropriate ways. Very often, when we see promiscuity in young girls, they're just looking for a daddy's love. And even in many cases with homosexuality, It's the result of a young man searching desperately for a father's love. Now, I'm not saying that if you don't have a father, if you weren't raised with a father, that you're going to turn out to be some kind of deranged pervert or something. I'm just saying that with a father's love, the developmental process in a child goes a lot smoother. And I say that because, as I said at the outset, fatherhood is a divinely ordained role that God instituted as an integral part of the family system. Despite what our culture says, the Bible talks a lot about fatherhood. The Bible talks about fathers, and interestingly, a lot of that discussion comes from a guy who never had any kids, that being the Apostle Paul. And we could also say with Jesus as well. There's one verse in particular that I want to focus on today. And it says a lot, I believe, about the importance of this role in our family and society, and also, in a sense, how we can fulfill this role as fathers. And it's found in Ephesians 6, verse 4. We're going to focus just in on this one verse today, Ephesians 6:4. You can look it up if you want, but I'll just read it for you. It's a pretty brief verse. It says, fathers, pretty clear who he's addressing here. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Pretty simple, huh? I love the simplicity of God's Word. I love how a phrase can just encapsulate a whole role and function in one simple way. Yet don't let the simplicity of these words take away from their depth and meaning. This verse contains two very important commands. If we look at it, it says something that we shouldn't do, and then it says something that we should do. So I want to look at those two things today and talk with you fathers about them. The first thing he gives is a do not. This is the negative thing. Do not. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. The word exasperate in the Greek literally means do not provoke your children to anger and to provoke them in such a way that they seethe with resentment. The New English Bible says do not goad your children. You get the picture here, what he's talking about? This is a father that is doing things that is stirring up anger in their children, stirring up frustration, stirring up aggravation, stirring up annoyance in a child, and ultimately disappointment. So let me share with you fathers today 3 things that I've seen, that I've handled in my work as a pastor and a counselor. Things that really seem to stir up exasperation in a child. First and foremost is criticism. Criticism. I had a good friend, and this guy had 2 sons, and his sons were brilliant. Straight A's in every class they took. Perfect scores on their SATs, and I mean perfect. They got into every college they applied to. They got full scholarships for everything because they were so smart. Brilliant kids. But if they got a 99 on a test, the first thing their father would say is, "Why did you get that one question wrong? What happened?" Right? You could have done better. You should have got that one. You should have got 100. Criticism. Do you think those kids were successful because they wanted to please their father in a healthy, loving relationship? Or do you think they were afraid that if they did anything wrong, they would be criticized. Right? Criticism hurts. Criticism exasperates a child. And it isn't always in the things we say. Sometimes it's in the things that we don't say. A lack of praise, a lack of encouragement, a lack of gentle words. Or sometimes we do these things, what I call a backhanded praise, where we say, "Hey, son, you did great today out on the soccer field. Wow, you scored 2 goals. Way to go. But, next week, try to get 3. Right? You did a good job, but you should have done better. Or, you did some great shots there out on the basketball court, but what happened to that one you missed?" Backhanded praise. I can't think of anything more exasperating to a child than criticism. It wears away their spirit and their soul. We see a similar idea found in Colossians 3:21, which says, Fathers, do not embitter your children, or they will become discouraged. Criticism stirs up bitterness and ultimately discouragement. And children who are criticized soon give up in life, trying to please a father who never seems to be able to be pleased. Don't exasperate your children with criticism. The second thing I've seen is strictness, or overly strictness. And this is a hard one for Christian fathers because, we all know that verse from Proverbs 26, train a child up in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not turn from it. That's true. But unfortunately, very often, fathers think that means we have to wield an iron fist and crack the whip on our children. Well, that works okay with horses, but not with a human being. Often the motive behind this is good. I understand the motive behind it. We want to raise our kids in the right way. We see our kids growing up in an increasingly pagan world, and we want to try to get them to walk the right path and to behave and to do well in life. But more often than not, this kind of an attitude and behavior comes out of someone who is overly controlling, or a father who feels that their children's behavior is a reflection of them, and therefore they come down a little too hard. I've seen way too many cases where fathers will use the Bible as a weapon rather than a support, where in teaching and training and raising up their children, they burden them with all the weight of the law without the grace of the gospel. I've also seen how a lot of those children grow up. And more often than not, the minute they get out of the house, they abandon the faith. They don't want any part of it. Or they spend their whole lives trying to please a father, trying to be perfect for an earthly father, and they miss out on the biblical truth that only Jesus can make them perfect with their Father. Fathers, don't burden your children with such strictness that it exasperates them and makes their experience and understanding of faith a joyless experience. The last thing that exasperates a child is inconsistency. Inconsistency. Jesus said in Matthew 5:37, simply, this is simple, guys, simply let your yes be yes and let your no be no. That's vitally important in the raising of a child. Nothing exasperates a child more than a father or a household where the rules keep changing. One day it's okay to do this, the next day it's not. One day a child is encouraged in a certain direction, the next day they're punished for it. That exasperates children. They don't know what the rules are. And often this takes its most damaging case in promises that are not kept. You've heard it said. You may have said it yourself. Yeah, I'm busy right now, but I promise I'll take you to the park this weekend. Or, yeah, I can't help you right now with your homework, but I promise I'll help you a little later on with that. And then we don't keep the promises. We may forget, it may slip our mind, but our children will remember those promises unkept 50 years later. They'll remember them. Inconsistency often shows up in the area of discipline. I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but just for now, let me just say, discipline needs to be consistent. How many times have you heard someone say, if you do that one more time, you're going to be punished? Or if you don't start behaving in this store, I'm going to take you out of this store. Child continues to misbehave. The father doesn't do anything about it. Inconsistency. A child who receives inconsistent discipline or a lack of discipline grows up to be an undisciplined child. They grow up to be a child who learns to flaunt the rules, to cut corners, to try to get away with things all through life because they've come to know, they've been raised in such a way that if I do something wrong, there are no consequences. I can get away with it. You know what they look like when they grow up. We see them all over our culture. That's a form of exasperation. I'll talk about that more in a minute. So these are ways that we can exasperate a child by not being consistent with them, by being overly strict or critical. So what should we do? Well, let's see what Paul says in Ephesians 6:4. The second part of the verse, he says, instead of doing those things that exasperate your child and build up frustration, instead bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. There are three things in this verse that Paul gives us to do. The first one simply is bring them up. Bring them up. The phrase literally means to nourish them, feed them, right? We tend to think, oh, that's the mother's job. But Paul's not talking about giving your kids food here. He's talking about bringing them up. Give them what they need to be involved in their life. I would say to be there. Be there in their life. Be a part of their upraising. This is not the mother's responsibility. It's our responsibility as well. Many fathers think this is the wife's job. This is the mother's job. You raise them up. You nourish them. You feed them. But Paul would disagree, and so would God. We need to be there, to be involved in the life of our children as they grow up. And I know it's hard. I know you're busy. I know you work a lot of hours. I know you can't always be home, but that's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. If your job is so busy, it requires so much of your time that you can't be there for your child, then I would suggest you get another job. Because what you're doing on your job isn't anywhere near as important as what your child needs back in your home. They need you to be there and to be involved in their life. When our children were young, I think we only had 2 of them at the time. I was going to a church, and a couple of guys said, "Hey, Doug, you want to play some golf?" I said, "Golf? I don't know. I've never played golf." "Well, come on out. We'll show you." "Okay." "When are you playing?" "We're going to play Saturday morning." "Okay." So got up, got together, left the house, went out Saturday morning, played some golf. It was okay. It was showing me things. Here's how you play. Here's how you swing. Had a good time. What'd you think? "Yeah, golf was pretty good. I liked it." "All right, well, come on out again. We're going to play next week." "Okay." Next Saturday, bright and early, got up, went out, played golf again. Pretty good. I enjoyed it. It was a fun sport. Those of you who have played golf know that there's a lot more to golf than just the golf game. After the golf game, you got to go out and get something to eat because everybody's hungry, go get something to drink, sit around, talk, joke, talk about all that you did right and all that you did wrong in the golf game. By the end of the day, I was getting home at like 3 o'clock. And this went on for like 3 weeks. And, wow, I was having a great time. After about the third week, Irene said, how long is this golf thing going to go on? I said, I don't know. You going to be doing this every Saturday? I don't know. I guess as long as it's sunny out, nice day. She said, you're gone all week at work. And a couple of nights a week, we go out to church for prayer group or Bible studies. And then Sunday, we're doing stuff at church all day. Now you're gone every Saturday. What's the story? I need you here to help me raise these kids. And I thought, and I said, yeah, you know what? She's right. She's right. I had to give up the golf. I liked it. It was fun. But I felt like what was more important for me at that point in my life was to be home and to be involved in the raising of my kids. To be there. And that's what Paul is saying here. Be there. Be involved in the raising of your children. And, not just in the big events, not just at their plays and at their soccer games and at the big, exciting things, but down in the day-to-day trenches of raising a child. Be there. Get involved in their life. And help your wife raise them. It will make your marriage a lot healthier too. I guarantee you that. So be there. The second thing the verse says expands on this a little bit, and it says to be there for a reason. The first reason to be there is to train them. To train them. Training. Bring them up in the training. The word for training there literally means to discipline them. To discipline them, to shape them, to raise them and train them in a certain way. Now, I know I just said a minute ago that strictness is a negative thing for a child, but that's not what discipline is. Often we confuse them. We think strictness is discipline, but it's not. Strictness burdens a child, but discipline builds them up. It trains them. It shapes them. Any of you who have ever played sports know what it's like to have a coach who is either a strict disciplinarian, a critical disciplinarian, they're no fun to play with, versus a coach who works with you and trains you and builds you up and builds skills and things into your life. They're a lot of fun to play for because they help you become a better athlete. Well, we're trying to help our children to become better Christians. And the way we do that is to gently train them, discipline them. To discipline a child means to build in habits, build in behaviors, build in a mindset in a gentle and encouraging way that will help them succeed in life. That's what it means to train or discipline a child. And yeah, I know, at times it requires punishment. At times these wonderful little bundles of joy get a little too exuberant. You need to instill or lay a little punishment on them. But if the training and the discipline is done right, it'll be minimal. A child who is trained well and disciplined doesn't require much punishment. And let me just say one thing for you fathers out there. In those times where punishment is needed, don't leave it up to your wife to do it. It's not the wife's job. Sometimes if she's home and you're not there and the child needs to be punished, okay, but you need to be involved in that as well. Children need to receive proper and restorative discipline from their fathers because it builds self-esteem in a child. When the mother does all the disciplining, what it says to the child is that the father doesn't care about their moral and spiritual development. Oh, that's your mother's job. In that case, the father just becomes the happy-go-lucky, good times buffoon that our culture wants him to be. someone who's not involved, not caring in the life of their child, absent from the important things in a child's life, which is to train them and discipline them. Most of the teens that I work with in my counseling experience, the emotionally disturbed teens, psychologically damaged teenagers that I worked with, all of them, in almost every case, expressed essentially the same complaint. And what that complaint was my father never disciplined me, never invested in my life. And I've also heard many stories and testimonies from prisoners who said, you know what, if I had a stronger disciplinarian father, I wouldn't be here right now. Fathers, we have an important role to play in the training and discipline of our child. It's not our wives' responsibility. You need to be involved in it as well. And it can be done in a gentle and encouraging way. And the last thing the verse says is to be there, not only in disciplining and training them, but also in instruction. Instruction. The word there for instruction literally means to place something in the mind of someone. And obviously he's talking about teaching our children. And what the verse says to qualify even that more is to not just teach them the ways of the world and math and social studies and English, but to teach them the ways of the Lord. This is the most important thing we can do as a father, is to raise our children and to train them and to instruct them in the ways of the Lord. First off, to teach them and instruct them about Jesus and how he died for their sins and how they can have a life of faith with him. And then secondly, all the things that follow that in terms of their lifestyle. Just like I mentioned with discipline, we often leave this to our wives. But our children need to know that as fathers, we are spiritual people and we care about their spiritual development. We care about their instruction in the Lord. I know many of you fathers are right on top of your kids with their schoolwork. How are you doing in math? What grade did you get in English this week? That's important to know. But are you just as concerned and just as on top of their spiritual development? Are you on top of them with that? Are you asking them, hey, what did you learn in Sunday school this week? Let's talk about it a little bit. Are we taking opportunities, whether it's at bedtime or first thing in the morning, to sit down and to instruct our children in the ways of the Lord? One of the most serious cases for this was the Old Testament prophet Eli. You know about Eli. He was a deeply spiritual man. He was a leader in Israel, a wonderful spiritual man. Unfortunately, his kids were a mess. They almost destroyed Israel. How could this godly man have such wayward children? Well, the Bible tells us in 1 Samuel 3:13. It says, Eli failed to restrain them. This was Eli's responsibility. He's the one that dropped the ball. He failed to restrain them. The Greek word for restrain there in the Septuagint is the same as the word for instruction here in Ephesians 6. Eli failed to restrain his sons by being there, by being involved in their life, by training them, by discipling them, and by instructing them in the ways of the Lord. He just let them go. And we see the results in their illicit behavior. Those two sons were exasperated by their father, and it showed in the way they lived their lives. So in closing, I want us fathers to know that you have an incredible opportunity and an incredible power to shape a life, the life of your child. And the way you shape that life will impact them for the rest of their lives, for better or worse. I want to encourage you to use that power, to use that opportunity in the same way that Jesus used the power that he had and the opportunity that he had to shape and disciple and to train the 12. He used that power not in a negative way. Jesus was never critical. Jesus was never scolding. Jesus never ignored his disciples. He was there for them, and he trained them, and he discipled them, and he disciplined them in the ways of the Lord, so that they would grow up to be strong, God-honoring followers of his. That's the job we have too, as fathers. But I can tell you, as you're probably picking up, it's going to require time. You need to invest time in your children, and it's going to require a commitment to do so, and it's going to require purposeful effort. But I can tell you today, especially you guys with young kids back there, now that I'm on the other side of the fence with grown children, I can tell you that it will be worth every single minute of effort you put into those children's lives. It will be worth every bit of it. I know it seems like a burden. I know it seems like you don't have time. But please, please, any time you invest in the life of your children will be well worth it. And I think the world will be a better place if we have more strong, solid Christian kids growing up to populate it. I want you to really enjoy this wonderful, amazing experience and opportunity you have that God has given any man in this life. That is the blessing of being a father and raising up a child to be a follower of his.